Welcome back. If you're watching this right now, maybe you're tucked under a blanket, the lights are low, headphones in. I want you to do one thing before we begin. Listen. Just for a moment, listen to whatever surrounds you. The hum of a fan, the creak of a floorboard, traffic or wind outside your window. Now, imagine that sound replaced by trees, dark trees, miles of them. No phone signal, no roads, just you, a tent, and whatever exists beyond the edge of your flashlight beam. Tonight, I'm bringing you 5 real camping nightmares. 5 stories from ordinary people who went into the wilderness looking for peace, for adventure, for a break from everyday life, and found something they will never forget. Some survived, some almost didn't, and every single one of them will tell you the same thing when you ask what they remember most. They never heard it coming. So settle in. This is going to be a long night. Story 1. The Trail That Closes at Dark. The Appalachian Trail, North Carolina, early October. Marcus Webb was 34 years old, a high school geography teacher from Asheville, and by all accounts, a man who had his life quietly under control. He drove a sensible car, graded papers on Sunday afternoons, and called his mother every Thursday without fail. Nothing about Marcus stood out, except for what happened the moment he stepped into the woods. He became someone else entirely. Not reckless, not running from anything, just deeply, profoundly at ease in the wilderness in a way he was never anywhere else. The smell of leaf decay and pine resin, the cold creek water, the low sound of wind through the canopy. It was a frequency his body naturally tuned to, smoothing out whatever had built up over the preceding weeks. He'd been section hiking the AT for 6 years, tackling 30 or 40 miles at a stretch whenever school breaks allowed. He kept a leather journal logging every section, every elevation profile, every wildlife sighting. He had good gear and better judgment. This particular trip was a 4-day solo section beginning at the Fontana Dam trailhead, heading north into the Great Smoky Mountains. He'd planned it for 3 months, printed his permit, tested his headlamp batteries twice. His pack weighed 31 pounds, his sleeping bag was rated to 15 degrees, and he carried a Garmin InReach satellite communicator clipped to his shoulder strap. He was not careless, he was not an amateur, and none of that would matter. He parked at the trailhead at 11:45 Thursday night, slept in his car, and stepped onto the trail at 5:27 the following morning, his headlamp cutting a cold white cone through the pre-dawn dark. The forest closed in on both sides, and he felt the tension in his shoulders. 2 months of faculty meetings, of grading, of slow institutional friction began already to release. He was heading for the Thunderhead Mountain Balds, open summits above the tree line where the view ran to the horizon in every direction. He'd been thinking about standing up there for months. He had no idea what else was waiting for him up there. The first day was everything he'd hoped for. He made good time through hardwood forest blazing with October color, the fallen leaves softening his footsteps to near silence. He stopped at a spring to filter water, watching a small bird work a branch nearby with its head tilted, as if genuinely curious about him.
By midday, he'd covered 12 miles, eaten lunch on a rock outcropping overlooking a sea of turning trees, and written half a page in his journal. This was where he first noticed it. Not anything alarming, just an awareness. He'd paused at a trail junction to check his map, and in that moment of stillness, when the white noise of his own movement fell away, he felt a sudden, sharp certainty that he was being watched. He turned. The ridge fell away behind him through a corridor of stunted spruce, deep shadows, no movement, no sound except wind. He shook it off. This happened in the woods sometimes, some ancient flicker of predator awareness firing when it wasn't needed. He marked his map and kept walking. But it came back. 3 more times in the next 2 hours, he stopped and turned and found nothing. The sensation wasn't constant. It flickered in and out, present for 100 yards, absent for a mile, then suddenly back, prickling the back of his neck like a cold finger. He wrote in his journal that evening, "Something was following me today, or felt like it, probably a deer. The ridge does something to the acoustics. You hear things that don't resolve into anything specific." He told himself that. He mostly believed it. That night, camped below Russell Field Shelter, he woke at 2 or 3 in the morning to the sound of footsteps moving around the perimeter of his campsite. Not the blundering crash of a bear, not the rustle of a small animal, deliberate, even, like something that knew how to walk quietly and was choosing to. He grabbed his headlamp, pressed the button, unzipped the tent door, and swept the light across the camp. Nothing. Empty forest, absolute stillness. He sat in the tent door for a long time with the light on and listened. Nothing came back. By morning, he'd half convinced himself it had been a dream. He broke camp and climbed toward Thunderhead, and the summit bald opened before him just after 9, and for a while, standing in the cold wind with the world falling away in every direction, ridge after ridge dissolving into haze at the horizon, he forgot about all of it. He was there for over an hour. He wrote in his journal. He took photographs. He felt the clean, specific gratitude of someone exactly where they're supposed to be. He didn't hear the man approaching until he was already 60 yards away. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, moving fast across the open grass with long, even strides, and his face tilted down toward the ground. Marcus watched him come and felt something fire in his nervous system before his rational mind could catch up, something old and specific and impossible to immediately name. Most hikers, approaching another person on an open bald, give some instinctive acknowledgement, a slight slowing, a lifted head. This man did none of those things. He walked the same pace, the same angle, as if Marcus were a rock or a tree. He passed within 20 feet. Marcus said, "Beautiful morning." The man stopped. Not a casual pause, a complete, immediate cessation, like a machine switched off. He turned his head. His face was unremarkable, undeterminate age, somewhere between 40 and 60, nothing deformed or monstrous about it, but the expression was wrong in a way Marcus couldn't precisely name. Not hostile, not threatening in any conventional sense, more like appraising, the way you look at something you've been following for a while and have finally caught up to. "You been out here long?" Flat voice, no inflection. "Second night." "Alone?" A pause. "Meeting my group further north." A lie his body supplied before his mind could think about it. The man held his gaze one beat too long, then, "Good day for it." He turned and walked north. Marcus sat very still and watched him go until he dropped below the far ridge. Then he picked up his Garmin and typed a message to his neighbor. Everything fine. Day 3, heading north. Mention to anyone who asks, I'm meeting friends on trail. He didn't know why he sent that second sentence. He just needed someone, somewhere, to know it was a lie. He broke camp in 12 minutes and began walking south.
He told himself he wasn't panicking. He told himself this while walking at a pace his body kept refusing to slow down from. Something between hiking and jogging, his nervous system having made a decision independently of his rational brain. The man had said nothing threatening, done nothing threatening. Marcus was speed walking south on a public trail because of a look, an expression he couldn't even properly describe. But his legs wouldn't slow down. He'd covered about a mile when he heard the footsteps behind him. He stopped, turned. The trail curved back through dense rhododendron, the kind that closed in on both sides and made the path feel like a corridor. No figure visible, but the sound was there, steady, rhythmic, maybe 50 yards back, pausing exactly when he paused. He walked faster. The footsteps walked faster. He counted his breathing, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. His hands had gone cold. His vision was narrowing the way it does when adrenaline takes over, peripheral vision shrinking, the center sharpening, the body redirecting everything toward speed and survival. At the top of a small rise, the trail opened briefly, and in that one exposed second, he looked back. The man was there, 40 yards, same pace, same downward angle of his face. Marcus ran. His pack bounced violently, trekking poles swinging from his wrists, boots hitting the descending trail hard. He took a switchback wrong and went down, left knee to the ground, pole raking across rock, white pain shooting up his leg. He scrambled up immediately. The knee held. He kept running. He crested the next ridge, gasping, turned, and looked back. The trail was empty. He stood there, bent over his poles, chest heaving. 2 minutes. No figure came over the ridge, no footsteps, just silence and forest and the distant sound of wind. Relief moved through him, and with it, something close to embarrassment. He'd run 2 miles in a panic over nothing. A strange hiker, an awkward exchange, a slightly off expression. He straightened up. The man was standing 20 yards ahead of him, on the trail, facing back toward Marcus. He had somehow gotten ahead of him. He pressed the SOS button on his Garmin at 11:47 in the morning. He held the device up so the man could see it and said, "I've activated an emergency beacon. Rescue services know my location." The man said nothing. He turned and walked north, and then he was gone. The trail was empty. The brush on both sides was undisturbed. No footsteps, no crashing, just gone. The SOS confirmation appeared on screen. GEOS has received your signal. Emergency services are being contacted. Stay at your current location. Marcus sat on a rock and stayed there for over 3 hours, watching both directions of the trail until the Park Service rangers arrived. They found nothing. No one matching his description. No sign of another person anywhere on that section of trail. What they did find at the campsite where Marcus had slept his second night was a circle of carefully smothered fire ash covered with dirt and leaves, and beside the stream,
in soft mud, a pair of boot prints, large and deep, no hiking gait to them, like something that had stood in one place for a long time, facing the campsite. The case was logged, investigated. No one was ever identified. Marcus drove home that night. He sat in a diner parking lot off I-40 for an hour after eating, watching the door without quite knowing why. Then he called his mother, not on a Thursday, on a Sunday, and she answered on the second ring and heard immediately from his voice that something was wrong. She didn't press him. She just talked. Her garden, the neighbor's new dog, some show she was watching. And he sat in that parking lot and listened and felt, slowly, the worst of it begin to unwind. He never completed that section of trail. He went back to the woods. He always went back, but he switched to day hikes for a long time, and when he eventually returned to overnight trips, he went with others, always with others. He kept his hand near the SOS button more than he used to. And sometimes, late at night, he'd lie awake and hear footsteps, measured, even, circling. He'd tell himself, "It's just a bear. It doesn't know what it's doing." He was never entirely sure he believed it.
Story 2. What lives in Crater Lake? Crater Lake National Park, Oregon, late July. Daniela Reyes was 29 years old, a marine biology doctoral student at Oregon State, and she had a complicated relationship with large bodies of still water. She spent her professional life in the ocean. She dove regularly, swam every morning, had done open water dives in conditions that had driven other grad students permanently to dry land. Water did not intimidate her. But Crater Lake was different. That knowing sat in her chest like a small cold stone every time she came here. She understood the science of the place perfectly. Crater Lake filled the caldera of Mount Mazama, a volcano that collapsed around 7,700 years ago. At nearly 2,000 feet deep, it was the deepest lake in the United States, fed entirely by rain and snowfall, with no rivers in and no rivers out. The water was extraordinarily pure. Visibility readings regularly exceeded 100 feet. Nothing entered the lake that didn't stay. That was the thing about Crater Lake, Daniela always thought. Whatever went in didn't come out. She was here with her advisor, Dr. Patricia Osi, and 2 other doctoral students, Jonah Fisk and Ewan Takahashi, conducting a 3-day thermocline study. Their worksite was at Cleetwood Cove, the only trail in the park descending all the way to the water's edge. The first afternoon, standing at the rim, looking down, the lake was what it always was, staggering. The color was wrong in the most beautiful possible way, a blue so deep and intense it looked artificial, like something poured from a bottle. The caldera walls dropped hundreds of feet straight to the water. Wizard Island, a small cinder cone rising from the lake's surface, sat in the middle of all that impossible blue, like something from a dream. "Every time," Jonah said softly. "Every time," Daniela agreed. She felt the cold stone in her chest and told herself it was awe. The first 2 days went smoothly. Good data, easy evenings around the campfire, the comfortable rhythm of people who've spent enough time together to stop performing. It was the 3rd morning, their last, when things went wrong.
The weather had changed overnight. Low gray-white sky, wind enough to put chop on the water, temperature down 15 degrees from the day before. "We should cut the waterwork short," Dr. Osei said, watching the sky. "We need the 60-meter sample. Without it, the thermocline profile is incomplete." Osei looked at her for a moment. 10 minutes in the water. If you're not back to the surface in 12, we pull you." 12 minutes, Daniela agreed. She suited up on the rocky ledge at the base of the trail, dry suit, BC jacket, twin tanks, weight belt, dive computer, fins, mask, and rolled backward off the ledge at 8:42 in the morning. The cold hit her through the dry suit like a physical blow. She finned down through the first 40 feet with smooth, practiced strokes. In Crater Lake's water, the clarity was almost disorienting. The caldera wall stretched away in every direction in something approaching true transparency. The blue deepening to near black below her, absolute and total, like descending into space itself. At 50 meters, she saw the anchor line, yellow polypropylene rope, weighted with a steel plate, and oriented toward it. She clipped the sensor to the anchor ring at 62 meters, confirmed the reading, and began her ascent. That was when she noticed the shape below her.
At first, she thought it was the visibility playing tricks. Clear water does this. The human visual system, designed for air, tries to impose familiar geometry on the depths, and sometimes you see things that aren't there. But this shape didn't dissolve when she focused on it. Below her, perhaps 30 meters below, in water that by every calculation should have had hundreds more feet before reaching bottom, there was something pale, large, still, pale, the color of old bone, not white, but the yellowed gray-white of something that had been in dark water for a very long time. Its shape was difficult to determine at that distance, roughly oval, perhaps circular, and it did not move. It simply existed down there in the dark, in water that should not have contained anything like it. She checked her computer. She had time. She should have started ascending. She hung in the water and stared for 30 seconds that felt much longer. And then it moved. Not a dramatic movement, a slow, deliberate shift, the pale oval tilting slightly, the way something enormous might adjust its orientation in deep water. And in that tilting movement, she caught, for just a moment, the briefest impression. She was never certain of this, but she never entirely dismissed it either, of two large dark spots on the pale surface, positioned roughly like eyes. She started ascending immediately. Her breathing went ragged. Her computer chirped at her to slow down. The decompression risk was real. She forced herself to stop, forced herself to reduce her ascent weight, hung at 5 meters for the required safety stop, her face turned downward, staring into the blue-black below her. Nothing came up after her. She surfaced at 8:59, 17 minutes, 5 over the limit. Dr. Osei was already in the kayak, face tight. What happened? I saw something. Daniela grabbed the side of the kayak. Her hands were shaking. Something at depth, pale, very large. Ewan and Jonah exchanged a look. How large? Osei asked carefully. I'm not sure, Daniela said. I'm not sure what I saw. They packed their equipment in near silence and drove back to the campground. That evening, Daniela described the observation as clinically as she could, qualifying everything, framing it as a scientist would, applying all appropriate uncertainty. No one laughed. They were scientists. The appropriate response to an unexpected observation is inquiry, not dismissal. Osei said, The deepest portions of this lake have been visited by ROV maybe a handful of times. We don't have a complete biological profile. We know the stocked species. We don't know what was here before. No one said anything to that. Daniela submitted a field note with full scientific caveats. 3 months later, an email arrived from a USGS bathymetric researcher who'd seen it. He asked her to describe the observation in detail. At the bottom of the email, almost as an afterthought, a single line: "We have noted anomalies at depth in several recent sonar sweeps. The images are difficult to interpret." He didn't attach the images. She asked him to. He never replied. She never dived Crater Lake again. Story 3: The Bear That Wasn't. Glacier National Park, Montana, August. The Bennetts had been planning this trip for a year and a half. Tom Bennett, 42, was a civil engineer from Minneapolis. His wife Sarah was a middle school science teacher who'd been trying to get Tom to a national park since their second year of marriage. Their daughters, Kayla, 16, and Mia, 12, arrived with mixed levels of enthusiasm. Kayla filled a notebook with facts about the park. Mia's investment hinged entirely on whether there would be Wi-Fi anywhere. There wasn't. Mia forgot about Wi-Fi within 20 minutes of arriving at Apgar Campground on the west shore of Lake McDonald. The evening was warm, the lake the color of hammered pewter through the timber, and Tom sat with his camp coffee and felt something settle in his chest. Kayla read from her notebook at dinner. The park has approximately 1,200 bears, 300 grizzly, 900 black. That's a lot of bears, Mia said. It's a conservation success story, Kayla said. Still a lot of bears, Mia maintained. Sarah laughed, and the sound of it went out into the warm Montana evening, and Tom thought, this is exactly what I wanted. 3 days in, Tom drove up to Logan Pass in the pre-dawn dark and started the Highline Trail at 6:15 in the morning. It was everything the guidebooks promised. The trail ran along the Continental Divide at over 6,000 feet, exposed ridge walks with sheer drop-offs on one side and big sky on the other. Mountain goats watching from rocky outcroppings with imperial disinterest. Views east and west until the earth curved away. He ate lunch at the Granite Park Chalet and was back on trail by 12:30, heading down toward the loop trailhead for the shuttle back. He was an hour into the descent, the trail dropping through dense timber, when he heard it. Something large in the trees to his left, close. The brush crashing with a specific heavy quality that makes the stomach drop in a very particular way. The gut-level recognition that whatever is in those trees is very, very big. He stopped, unclipped his bear spray, the canister Sarah had insisted on and he'd rolled his eyes at, and held it forward, safety off. "Hey, bear. Whoa there." The crashing stopped. He stood still for a full minute, absolute silence, the kind that follows a large disturbance. Then he started walking again, talking loudly. He heard it again 20 yards down the trail, parallel to him, moving at exactly his pace. He stopped. It stopped. He walked. It walked. For a quarter mile, Tom Bennett moved through the Montana wilderness while something large matched him step for step in the timber just off the trail. He couldn't see it. He couldn't identify it. He He just knew it was there, and it was keeping pace with him with a deliberateness that didn't feel like coincidence. He talked continuously. He clapped. He sang, the first thing that came to mind, inexplicably, which was "Don't Stop Believin'," singing it at full volume into the Montana wilderness, while whatever was in the brush said nothing and kept moving beside him. He reached the loop trailhead with his back to the road, bear spray still raised, watching the tree line. Nothing came out. The shuttle driver took one look at him and said, "Bear?" "Something," Tom said. She nodded. "Grizzly. They'll pace you for miles up there. Not usually aggressive, usually just curious." A pause. "Usually." He called Sarah from the parking lot. She answered on the first ring. "How was the hike?" A long silence. "Interesting," he said. He didn't tell her the full story until the drive home 2 days later, somewhere in North Dakota, with the mountains 200 miles behind them and the plains rolling flat in every direction. When he finished, Sarah said, "You sang 'Don't Stop Believin' at a grizzly bear." In the moment, it seemed appropriate. She put her hand on his on the center console. "Journey was right there for you." He laughed. The plains rolled by. The mountains sat behind them, invisible and enormous, and whatever had paced him through the Montana timber stayed there in the trees, waiting for the next one. Story 4. The Inlet. Boundary Waters Canoe Area, Minnesota, June. Aaron Kessler was 51 years old, a former Army Ranger who'd spent 2 decades trying to find civilian settings that approached the focus and presence the military had given him. He'd tried marathons, jiu-jitsu, and an ill-advised stint of day trading. What he kept returning to was paddling. Specifically, solo wilderness canoe trips in the Boundary Waters, a 1-million-acre maze of interconnected lakes and portage trails along the U.S.-Canada border where motorized vehicles were banned and the only way to move was under your own power. He'd been coming here 11 years. He knew the waterways the way he'd once known the terrain outside Kandahar, not from maps, but from the body. The way current moved through certain channels, the placement of submerged rocks in early season low water, the particular quality of silence on certain lakes at dawn. He put in at the Moose Lake Landing on a Tuesday morning in early June, the sky enormous and indifferent, and paddled north. He wasn't here to outrun anything. He was here because this was for him the best version of being alive. The first 3 days were perfect. 50 miles of open water, 8 portages, 3 island camps, the water between him and shore a psychological barrier as much as a physical one. On the 4th day, the weather turned. He'd been watching the southwest sky darken since mid-morning, but the system moved faster than he'd anticipated. He was caught mid-crossing on a long, exposed lake when it hit, a June thunderstorm that transformed flat, glassy water into 3-foot chop in under 10 minutes. He paddled hard for the lee shore, the canoe bucking and yawing, water shipping over the bow. The lightning was already close. He counted under 5 seconds between flash and thunder, less than a mile. In the boundary waters during a storm, he was the most exposed thing on the water by a considerable margin. He made shore with water in the hull, a strained shoulder, and shaking hands. He dragged the canoe up the rocky bank and sat in the trees while the storm worked the lake over, lightning cracking the exposed ridges to the east with sounds like artillery fire. He'd been in worse. He'd been in actual artillery. This was manageable. He was cold, wet, and hurting, but he was on land and the storm would pass. It was while he sat waiting, his adrenaline slowly draining, that he heard the sound from up the lake shore, maybe 300 yards north. Rhythmic, steady. Not the storm. The storm was moving east, and this sound wasn't moving with it. A sound he couldn't immediately place. When the lightning eased enough to move, he followed it. He found the source in a rocky inlet, a canoe tied to a submerged boulder by its bow line, swamped, filled with water. One paddle in it, one paddle gone. A dry bag still clipped to the center thwart, its owner nowhere in sight. Aaron didn't hesitate. He pulled out his satellite communicator and typed, "Found swamped canoe, unoccupied, rocky inlet approximately 3 miles north of Knife Lake access. Request search and rescue." Then he started looking. He found her 40 minutes later. She was wedged into a crack in the rocks above the waterline, barely conscious, having apparently dragged herself there through some final expenditure of remaining function. If she'd passed out 20 feet closer to the water, she'd have slid back in. She was in her 40s, wearing a dry suit that had failed at the neck gasket. Water had been sitting against her body for what might have been an hour, draining her core temperature with quiet efficiency. Aaron treated hypothermia the way he'd been trained. Get her out of the wetsuit, get her horizontal, cover her core, no vigorous movement. He didn't have a sleeping bag, his was 3 miles away, but he had emergency blankets, dry layers, and a stove, and he used all of them methodically. She was conscious enough, once he'd stabilized her, to tell him her name was Francine. She was a paddling club volunteer, out day tripping alone. The storm had moved faster than she had expected. "I thought I could make the far shore," she said. "You almost did. You got yourself out of the water. That was you." Search and rescue reached them by water at 11 o'clock. 4 canoes of volunteers in the dark, headlamps cutting across water that had gone calm and glassy after the storm passed. Aaron met them at the water's edge with a signal light and helped them load Francine onto the evacuation canoe. She was shaking when they lifted her in. Good sign, the body still generating heat. "You saved my life," she told him. "You saved your own life," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Why were you even out here looking?" Aaron thought about it. "I heard the canoe," he said simply. "I followed the sound." He paddled out the next morning in clean June sunshine, the storm entirely gone, the lakes still and enormous. He thought about Francine. He thought about the 37 other people in the other life that he'd helped carry out of places where the world had tried to kill them. He thought about the simple algorithm of survival, how often what saves a life is nothing more than proximity and attention, being close enough to hear, staying awake to the possibility of disaster, even inside beauty. He made camp on his island and sat on the rock shelf above the water with his coffee and watched the sun move. He came here to be present. He thought he'd managed it.
Story 5. The Last Campfire. White Mountains, New Hampshire, November. Eleanor Marsh was 67 years old, a recently retired English teacher from Concord, New Hampshire, and she had been camping in the White Mountains for 43 years. She'd started at 24, freshly out of school, newly single, with a second-hand pack that weighed a third of her body weight, and a need to find out whether she was the kind of person who could be alone in the wilderness and be okay with it. She discovered quickly that she wasn't merely okay with it. She was more herself out here than anywhere else. The mountains asked direct, uncomplicated questions. Can you climb this ridge? Navigate this fog? Keep yourself warm when the temperature drops to 20? The answers were yes or no, and there was something deeply relieving for a woman who spent her working life in the complex social architecture of a high school about that kind of clarity. 43 years, over 200 nights in the backcountry. She'd completed all 48 of New Hampshire's 4,000-foot peaks twice. She'd winter camped every year since she turned 30. November was her favorite. Crowds gone, foliage past, the mountains stripped to their essential selves, bare rock and dark conifers, and the first serious cold. The November light sat low and slanted, turning everything gray and brown and deep green. The sky that specific white that isn't quite cloud and isn't quite sun. This trip was a celebration. She'd retired in June, first full autumn as a free woman. She'd spent September and October getting the house in order and visiting her daughter, Emma, in Boston. But November she'd claimed entirely for herself. 4 nights in the Pemigewasset wilderness, solo, a loop she'd done half a dozen times. Lincoln Woods trailhead north, up through Franconia Notch, over the Franconia Ridge, back down through Garfield Ridge. Over 40 miles with significant elevation. Hard miles, but familiar ones. She packed the way she always did, with the methodical precision of 4 decades of practice. Sleeping bag first, sealed in its dry bag. Her 3-season tent, familiar as a second skin after 20 years of use. Compass, paper map, headlamp with 3 full battery sets, emergency kit, bear spray, whistle, signal mirror. Satellite communicator, fully charged. She had everything. She always did. She drove to the Lincoln Woods trailhead on a Tuesday morning in early November, the parking lot nearly empty, the sky that perfect cold white she loved, and she shouldered her pack and walked north into the mountains. The first night she camped at the base of the Liberty Spring Trail, the brook running low and clear in the November dryness. She cooked dinner, wrote in her journal, watched the stars emerge above the notch with November clarity. Cold, dry air, no humidity, the sky pinned with light. She fell asleep with the deep, specific contentment of someone doing exactly what they were made to do. The second day she climbed to the Franconia Ridge. It was everything it always was in November. Exposed, cold. The views from the ridge spine ran 360 degrees, Lincoln and Lafayette on either side, the Pemigewasset fallen away east and south toward a horizon that seemed to belong to another world. She stood at the high cairn and turned slowly in the wind and felt a gratitude that had nothing sentimental in it, just clean, present, immediate. She was here. She was doing this. That was enough. She began the descent from Lafayette around 2 in the afternoon. The accident was so ordinary it felt almost insulting. A stretch of trail below the tree line, unremarkable, no ice, no technical terrain, a path she'd walked a dozen times. A route. Her right boot caught it in a way it hadn't caught it the dozen times before. She went down hard, twisting, her right hand instinctively reaching for the ground, and she felt the fracture happen the way you feel things in nightmares. More sensation than sound, the bone giving way under the impact with a clarity that left no room for doubt. She lay still for 30 seconds, breathing through her nose. Then she sat up and began to assess.
The forearm was broken.
Radius, most likely, from the location of the pain. Displaced or not, she couldn't immediately determine, but the hand had sensation and could grip, which were both encouraging signs. She was roughly 3 miles from the nearest trailhead by the shortest route. She reached for her satellite communicator with her left hand and sent a message to Emma. Fell on descent from Lafayette. Broken arm. Activating SOS. I'm okay. Love you. Then she pressed the SOS button and, working one-handed and with her teeth, began constructing a splint from a trekking pole and the compression bandage from her first aid kit. The rescue took 11 hours. Mountain rescue in November in the White Mountains is a different operation than in the warmer months. The 8 volunteers from Pemigewasset Valley Search and Rescue, each of them with dozens of operations behind them, faced a 3-mile approach in the dark on rocky trail in temperatures that dropped to 19 degrees overnight. Ellie had a time estimate from the communicator's confirmation message. They'd reach her by 8, possibly later. It was 4:30. The light was already failing. She made camp. This was what 43 years in the mountains gave you. Not invulnerability. She was injured and alone in the cold, and she knew it. But the deep practiced knowledge of what to do with the next 10 minutes and then the 10 after that. She couldn't set up her tent one-handed, but she could get inside her sleeping bag. She could get her stove lit with one hand and make hot tea. She could eat. She could stay warm. She did all of these things with methodical efficiency, each small action costing her a specific amount of pain, none of it earning her a moment of despair. She sat against a boulder in the dark with her arm in its makeshift splint and a thermos of tea going cold in her left hand, and she thought. She thought about her students. 23 years of them cycling through her classroom, the ones who'd struggled, the ones who'd soared, the ones who'd simply waited for the bell. The books she'd loved, the discussions that had sometimes caught fire unexpectedly, making the whole difficult business of teaching feel worth every exhausting hour. She thought about Emma, sitting in her Boston apartment right now with the tracking app open on her phone, watching a small dot on a digital map of the White Mountains that was her mother. Emma knows where I am, Ellie thought. That single fact was, in a very cold night, the warmest thing available. The hours passed. The temperature dropped. The wind moved through bare branches with a sound she'd known for 40 decades. Low, constant, indifferent. The sound of the mountains simply being themselves. She wasn't afraid of that sound. She'd never been afraid of it. She wrote in her journal with her left hand, the letters crooked and childlike, until the headlamp battery made it impractical. Then she put the journal away and sat with the dark. The rescue team's headlamps appeared in the trees at 9:17, beams swinging through the timber, voices carrying in the cold air. She switched on her signal light and called out. A voice called back. She sat with her broken arm and her cold tea and waited. The rescue leader, a man named Pete, maybe 40, with the particular steadiness that develops in people who've done this work long enough, crouched beside her and said, "Ms. Marsh, we've got you." She almost cried. Not quite. "I made it easy for you. I stayed put." "You did everything right," Pete said. They packaged her properly, splinted the arm, and loaded her onto a litter. 8 people carried her 3 miles through the November dark, picking their way over roots and rocks by headlamp light. She lay on her back looking up at the stars between the bare trees and thought about 43 years and the particular economy of the mountains, the way they gave you everything and took whatever they wanted, and that agreement once made couldn't be unmade. She had no regrets about making it. The arm healed. She was back on trail by March, a modest 3-mile loop, snow still heavy in the trees, the first brooks beginning to thaw and open up. She called Pete when she finished, left a voicemail because he didn't answer, said, "It's Eleanor Marsh. I just wanted you to know I'm still out here." She was. She always would be.
And that brings us to the end of tonight's stories. 5 people, 5 different places, 5 moments where the ordinary world of a camping trip, the fire rings and maps, the gear lists and permits, the small, careful rituals of a life lived deliberately outdoors, collided with something raw and real and unavoidable. What stays with me most every time I return to these stories is this: none of these people did anything wrong. Marcus was experienced and prepared. Daniela was a trained professional operating within her expertise. Tom was a careful father with his bear spray clipped and his head on straight. Aaron was exactly the kind of person the wilderness desperately needs: attentive, capable, awake to what's around him. And Ellie had 43 years of mountain knowledge and still caught a root. That's the thing nobody tells you about the wilderness. It doesn't care about your preparation. It doesn't reward caution or punish carelessness with any particular fairness. It isn't malicious. It has no interest in any of us. It simply is. And the moment you step into it, you are part of a world operating entirely on its own terms, indifferent to how well you planned or how carefully you packed or how many years you've been doing this. That indifference is what terrifies us about these places, and it's exactly what calls us back. There's a kind of honesty in wilderness that you can't find anywhere else. The mountains and the lakes and the deep backcountry trails don't perform and don't pretend. They're the same whether anyone is watching or not, whether anyone survives or not, whether we ever return or never do. Standing inside that kind of honesty, even when it's dangerous, maybe especially when it's dangerous, does something to a person that nothing else quite replicates. Marcus knew it. Daniela felt it before she ever rolled backward off that ledge into the blue water. Aaron built his whole post-military life around finding it again. Ellie gave 43 years to it, and would have given 43 more if she could. Even Tom felt it, pacing a Montana ridgeline in the dusk, Journey blasting into the timber, something enormous keeping pace in the dark just off the trail, and came home from it laughing. That's the story underneath all these stories, I think. Not just the danger, not just the fear, but the fact that these people kept going back. They keep going back, even knowing what they know now, even carrying those specific, particular memories. They keep lacing up their boots and walking into the trees. Because the thing that almost gets you and the thing that saves you are the same thing. Paying attention, being present, staying awake to the world around you, and accepting, finally, that you are a small creature moving through a large and indifferent place, and finding somehow that this is not diminishing, it's freeing. I want to thank you for spending this time with me tonight. These stories matter. Somewhere in the telling and the listening, we rehearse something we need. We practice the feeling of danger from a safe distance, and maybe that practice is worth more than we realize. If one of these stories stayed with you, if Marcus's stranger on the ridge kept you up a little later than you planned, or Daniela's moment in the deep water of Crater Lake settled somewhere cold and specific in your chest, or Ellie's long November night on the mountain gave you something to think about, tell me in the comments below. Which story got to you? Which one are you still thinking about? And if you're ready for more, the next story is already waiting. Click the video above or let autoplay take you there. I'll be here. Stay careful out there. And whatever you do, listen to the woods. They're always trying to tell you something. Good night.